All right, today we're diving into a real high-stakes legal battle. It's a story that pits retired employees against a national pension fund, and it all boils down to one single critical question.
So let's just jump right in with this. Imagine this for a second. You've worked your entire life, paid your dues, and then the Supreme Court itself opens a door for you to get a better pension in retirement. But then your old company's internal rulebook, just some company policy, is used to slam that door right in your face. Can they even do that? Is that legal?
Well, look, this is not just some hypothetical. For 86 retirees from Barrett Heavy Electricals Limited, Beach, this exact scenario became their reality. After decades of service, their shot at a more secure retirement suddenly hit a massive wall.
And what was that wall made of? Not some big law passed by Parliament, no. It was a single administrative memo, a circular, put out by the EPFO. And this one document, this one piece of paper, became the villain in a fight for their rights.
So to really understand this conflict, we've got to first break down a key and kind of wonky part of India's whole pension system. The key term you need to know here is exempted establishment. Basically, really big companies, with thousands of employees like BHEL, can get a special license to manage their own Provident Fund, or PF. So instead of sending all that money to the government's EPFO each month, they handle it themselves in a private trust. But this right here is the absolute heart of the legal fight. That special exemption, it's only for the Provident Fund. That lump sum you get when you retire, it is not an exemption from the national pension scheme. So even at these huge companies, every single employee is still a member of the national pension system, and they're governed by national law. That distinction, well, it turns out it's everything. Okay, now let's get to the battleground. When this went to court, the whole case really came down to a very clear hierarchy of laws.
See, in India's legal system, there's a clear pecking order, and you can think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you've got the Constitution. Below that, you have laws passed by Parliament. Those are called statutes. Under that are the schemes created by those laws. And then way down at the very bottom are private agreements, like a company's internal rules. And the number one rule is something at the bottom can never ever overrule something higher up.
So the whole fight boiled down to three key arguments. First, the trust rules. The employees said, hey, our company's rules are for the PF, not the national pension scheme. But the EPO said, nope, those rules are a binding contract. Then, on the issue of already being retired, the employees argued that the Supreme Court created a special window for them because there was so much legal confusion for years. The EPO's position? Sorry, you're retired. You've exited the scheme. Too late. And finally, on the money, the employees said this is just moving funds around, an adjustment of accounts. But the EPO warned of a huge financial loss to the whole system.
Now, it's important to know the BHL employees didn't walk into court all by themselves. They actually had some really powerful allies in the form of previous Supreme Court judgments that had already paved the way for them.
Let's just quickly trace the history here. The option for a higher pension was created way back in 1996. For years, there was all this confusion about deadlines until 2018 when the Supreme Court in the R.C. Gupta case basically said there's no cutoff date. Then, in 2022, we got the landmark Sunil Kumar judgment. It gave everyone a special window to apply, and, this is key, it explicitly said this right applies to employees of exempted establishments too. But then, just as that window is about to close, bam! The EPFO issues its circular, creating this brand new hurdle based on internal company rules. And this is the line from the Supreme Court's 2022 judgment that became the legal rock for the BHEL employees. It is completely unambiguous. The court said the right applies to employees of exempted companies in the exact same manner as everyone else. No special conditions, no asterisks, no fine print. So armed with this crystal clear Supreme Court precedent, these 86 retirees took the EPFO circular to the Madras High Court to challenge it. And the verdict? Well, it was swift and it was decisive. The court struck down the EPFO circular, just like that. It found that the administrative memo was in direct violation of the Supreme Court's own orders.
So how exactly did the court take apart the EPFO's defense? Well, first, on the trust rules, it said a private agreement can't override a national law. It's that legal pyramid again. You can't flip it upside down. Second, on that exited members argument, the court basically said, look, for 8 years, there was massive legal confusion. You can't punish employees for not opting in during all that chaos. The whole point of the Supreme Court's window was to fix that exact problem. And finally, on the financial loss argument, the court simply pointed out that the Supreme Court had already heard all those concerns in earlier cases and had decided in favor of the employees anyway.
And the court's final orders were crystal clear. It completely quashed the circular and all the rejection letters that were sent to the BHEL employees. It then directed the EPFO to accept all the applications that were submitted on time. And it ordered that as soon as the employees pay back the difference in contributions, their higher pension has to start from the very next month. So this judgment was a massive, massive victory for those 86 employees, for sure. But its impact, well, it ripples out far beyond them, and it creates a whole new reality for the entire pension ecosystem. And I mean, this is a huge deal. We're not just talking about 86 people anymore. We are potentially talking about hundreds of thousands of employees from large public sector companies and other big employers all across India. For the EPFO, this ruling completely invalidates a key tool it was using to manage what it sees as a potential tidal wave of applications, and frankly, a huge financial liability that it hasn't planned for.
You know, this case really just perfectly highlights that classic tension you find in any social security system. On one side, you have the court standing up and saying that an individual's right, one that's guaranteed under a national law, is sacred. But on the other side, you have the very real-world challenge of keeping the whole system financially stable. A pension fund is a giant collective pot of money, and if a huge number of people suddenly shift to higher payouts, it creates enormous challenges.
And as legal analysts are already pointing out, this verdict really marks a definitive shift. It strengthens the protection of employee rights, and it sends a really clear message to administrative bodies like the EPFO that they can't just make up their own rules that contradict the law in the Supreme Court. It holds them accountable. And so, this is where we're left. The court has settled the legal question. It has protected the rights of these employees. But in doing so, it leaves this massive policy question just hanging in the air. With the floodgates now open, who is going to be responsible for making sure the entire pension fund is healthy and stable for future generations? That is the challenge that now moves out of the courtroom and onto the desks of policymakers.
This is the brief on higher pension rights for employees of exempted establishments in India. So there's been a really important ruling from the Madras High Court. It confirms India's national pension rules override internal company rules. This is key for employees at what are called exempted establishments, basically companies managing their own employee retirement funds. Okay, what are the main things to take away from this? First, national law is king. The court was crystal clear. India's main pension plan, the Employees' Pension Scheme, or EPS 95, trumps the internal rules of these exempted companies. They even tossed out an official memo trying to use company rules to deny higher pensions. The message? Good changes in the law apply to everyone, automatically. Second, this reinforces those earlier Supreme Court decisions on higher pensions. Remember R.C. Gupta? No cutoff date. And EPFO vs. Sunil Kumar B. extended rights to exempted folks, setting that January 31, 2025 application deadline. So now, employees can actually deposit any missed payments with interest to secure a higher pension later on. Finally, let's talk impact. It's a huge win for potentially thousands of employees, right? A clearer path to more retirement money. But it definitely creates a big administrative job for the EPFO, the pension organization. Expect a wave of applications. And yeah, it highlights that ongoing question about the pension fund's long-term financial health. We'll likely see an appeal from the EPFO. Ultimately, this verdict puts employee rights first, establishing national pension law over private rules, and really shaping India's social security system.
This is the brief on higher pension rights in exempted establishments. Okay, so India's pension system, man, it's been tangled up in legal fights for like a decade, right, about employee rights. But there's this big Madras High Court ruling that just totally shook things up for folks in companies that handle their own provident funds. You know, those exempted establishments like bail. So here are the three really crucial takeaways you need to know. All right, first thing, the court basically said the official Employees' Pension Scheme, or EPS 95, is king. It overrides any internal rules these private company trusts might have. So company rules, they just can't stop you from getting higher pension benefits. The court shot down that EPFO circular from Jan 2025. That's the Employees Provident Fund Organization, remember, because it tried using those internal rules to say no. The law, especially when it helps employees, wins out. Simple as that. Second, this ruling really clears the path for higher pensions and tells you exactly what to do. So if you retired after September 1st, 2014, the EPFO now has to take your joint option application, assuming you sent it by that extended deadline Jan 31st, 2025. And get this, if you already took out your Provident Fund money, you can actually put the difference back in, plus interest, based on your full, uncapped salary. Do that and boom, the EPFO starts paying you the higher pension the very next month. Finally, this isn't just about fixing past problems. It's a huge shift for future pension rights, fundamentally strengthening employee protection. You know, it's pretty much telling the EPFO, look, administrative hurdles can't block statutory benefits. Yeah, the EPFO will probably appeal to the Supreme Court. Big money involved, right? But honestly, their chances look pretty slim. And bigger picture, this really puts pressure on the EPFO and policymakers to take a hard look at the whole pension scheme's long-term financial health. So, at the end of the day, your statutory pension rights, they can't just be watered down by red tape or company rules. Period.